Anyone who has read the biographies of Jesus, we usually call them the Gospels, has come to know Peter. We know Peter quite well, don't we? He's usually the one who speaks up and says what everyone else is thinking. He leads and he wears his heart on his sleeve. He is. We love his openness and his passion, don't we? And yet, Peter is remembered, the disciple Peter is remembered most clearly for two incidents. And there were both times when Peter tried to avoid suffering. On the first occasion, Peter actually challenged Jesus. Jesus had said, I must face suffering and death, I'm going to the cross. That has to happen before the glory of resurrection. And Peter's like, don't you speak like that, Jesus. You're not going to suffer. And do you remember what Jesus says to Peter? He says, get behind me, Satan. He calls him Satan. Because at that time, Peter's thinking was so deeply opposed to the way of Jesus. The second occasion was a time when Peter himself was faced with the potential of suffering with Jesus. Do you remember? Just after Jesus is arrested and taken away, 3 times Peter is recognized and they go, oh, you're that Jesus friend, aren't you? And 3 times Peter says, no, I am not. You're not doing that to me. And so we might think, well, who's this guy to be included in the Bible? Well, he's the guy who Jesus chose. And this is good news because actually, Peter is so like us all, isn't he? None of us want to suffer and die. None of us naturally want to take up the cross and follow Jesus to suffering and death. Our sinful, natural instincts are selfish and geared to immediate self-preservation. Our fleshly wisdom tells us that we keep our life by grasping onto it, by protecting ourselves, by clutching all we want to ourselves. We run away from suffering and so easily fall into panic, overwhelmed by anxiety and worry. We lose perspective and we think that this life is all there is. Peter is like all of us. And Peter wants us to learn what he learned the hard way. That the journey is suffering now and glory later. Suffering now and glory later. You see, Peter saw suffering as something to be avoided. But now that he's seen Jesus go through the cross, down into the grave and up into new life, he now understands that we are called to this. This is our calling, to be holy. This is how we be holy in the midst of hostility, even and especially when it means suffering. And that there is great joy and life and even triumph to be found in the way of Jesus, the way of the cross, suffering now and glory later. As Christians, you must have felt it, can't just be me. As Christians, we are under constant pressure to blend in with the world, to be just like everyone else, to go along with our natural instincts. We're told, just do what feels good. We're constantly under the pressure to follow the wisdom of this passing age. Yet, as followers of the crucified Jesus, we are different. Because although this world lies under the influence of the devil, we belong to the living God. And so throughout this letter, Peter will explain how this difference must be shown in our day-to-day lives. But doing that, living differently to the world around us, will certainly bring us persecution, sacrifice, and suffering. And so Peter wrote this letter to strengthen and encourage the church throughout the world to endure these sacrifices and sufferings with confidence in the glories that will come when Jesus returns. And Peter's encouragement starts straight away in verse 1. He says, so he's saying, this is from Peter, to Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ, to those who are elect exiles of the dispersion. So Peter begins with who he is writing to. This is what we sometimes call a general epistle. So it's not written to an individual. It's not even written to one particular church. It's written generally to all who find themselves in this situation. Exiles. Exile means cast out, pushed away, sent away from where you live and belong. You see, Peter wrote this at a time when it wasn't safe to be a Christian. Nobody wanted Christians around. And many Christians were expelled from their homes, from their cities, even from their own countries. And so Peter is writing essentially to what the world considered a bunch of nobodies. A bunch of nobodies scattered everywhere. But Peter says, you may be exiles, but you are elect exiles. Even while you are rejected by the world, you are wanted by God. Isn't that amazing? Even while you are rejected by the world, you are wanted by God. I think quite often we can feel lost, scattered, displaced, even if we find ourselves like in the same place that we grew up in. Often the world has changed and we don't really feel wanted or even acknowledged sometimes. We feel alone. We can feel that, you know what it's like if you think too much about it, it can kind of get a bit scary, can't it? You're like, well, I'm just kind of one person in this town of like 90,000 people. And this town is like just one town of many in the UK. And the UK is just a small part of the world. And, well, the world's just this tiny bit of the solar system. And the solar system is one of many systems in our, galaxy. And then our galaxy is one of however many you think in the universe. And it's like, how small am I compared to everything there is? I'm just like this speck, like flying through space on this piece of rock. We can get to thinking that way, can't we? And we're like, does anybody know I'm here? Does anybody know my story or know my struggles? Does anything I do actually even really matter? Well, Peter is telling us that Jesus sees, and he knows, and he wants you. He's deeply invested in you and in your life. You see, Peter locates the audience as geographically scattered, but spiritually they are found. They are known. They are located in Jesus. He says, you may be scattered, you may be far from home, you may be alone, but you are known and wanted by God. You have been on the mind of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit for a long time, and they have been working together for you to make something of you. When we feel lost and small and alone in this world, when the whole world rejects us, we are reminded that the whole Trinity is at work for the church. To those who are the exiles of the dispersion, according to the foreknowledge of God the Father, in the sanctification of the Spirit, for the obedience to Jesus Christ. The whole world might be against us. That's nothing compared to the whole Godhead being for us. We are wanted. This brings us on to the second truth that Peter wants us to hold on to as we walk through this hostile world. We are wanted and we are washed. When everything is going wrong, when life is hard, remember this. We are wanted by Jesus. We are washed by Jesus. We are sprinkled with his blood. That's what it says here. What does sprinkled with blood mean? Well, when was blood sprinkled? We could think of Passover, couldn't we? That great day when the ancient church was brought out of Egypt, brought out of exile, at the beginning of their journey into the promised land. We could think of that when they put the blood on the doorposts, and that'd be a really good place to start. But there's actually a place, and only one place, in the Old Testament where the people were sprinkled with blood. And we read about it in Exodus 24. What's happened is Jesus has led Israel out of Egypt, making them his people, bringing them out of the captivity of those other gods, and he leads them to his mountain. He brings them to his place, and then he gives them his word. He gives them the Torah. And we read, Moses took the book of the covenant and read it in the hearing of all the people. And all the people said, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do. We will be obedient. And Moses took the blood and sprinkled it on the people and said, behold, the blood of the covenant of the Lord that the Lord has made with you in accordance with all these words. So, what Peter is referring to when he speaks of obedience and blood is this. He's speaking of covenant. Covenant. He's saying we are God's covenant people. And very simply that means we are the people who are in relationship with him. And the way that happens is that Jesus saves us. He brings us out of slavery to sin, out of slavery to death, by washing us with his blood. And so now, having been saved by him and washed by him, we now obey him, living the life that he has given. And all of it happens according to his great mercy. Do you see that in verse 3? Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. According to his great mercy, he has caused us to be born again to a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus. That is why we so often pray, Jesus, have mercy on me, a sinner, because his mercy is our only hope. It is God's mercy that causes us to be born again. It's not our work. It's not even our obedience. It is all Jesus. He and he alone is the cause of our salvation. How? Through his resurrection. We thought about so deeply on Easter Sunday. But what we will see time and time again, because it is important to Peter, as it is to Paul and James and John and all the New Testament writers, Jesus alone is the cause of our salvation. But it doesn't mean that our behavior is unimportant. How do we live? The question is, how do we live holy in the midst of hostility? Well, we're going to see Peter say over and over again, faithfulness, holding on to Jesus. And so we have this quite big chunk here in verses 3 to 7, which we'll unpack a bit. Let me just read it to you. According to his great mercy, he has caused us to be born again, I'm skipping a few bits, through the resurrection of Jesus Christ, to an inheritance that is kept in heaven for you, who, by God's power, are being guarded through faith for a salvation ready to be revealed in the last time. In this you rejoice, though now for a little while, if necessary, you have been grieved by various trials, by various hard things, so that the tested genuineness of your faith, more precious than gold that perishes, though it is tested by fire, may be found to result in praise and glory and honor and the revelation of Jesus Christ. Like I said, there's so much there to unpack, and there's so many bits I'd written about, and we had to cut that out this morning. We haven't got time for that. So we're going to have a crack at this briefly, and there may be bits you're like, I want to follow up on that. Well, it's Slow Cooker Sunday. We've got loads of time after church for you to come and ask me. We can unpack all the bits I had to leave out. So Peter introduces here this idea of trials and hardships. He says, you have been grieved by various trials. And we might ask, why? Why do I have to be grieved by various trials? Well, Peter explains, it is only in our sufferings that the reality of our faith is displayed. In other words, it is only in our trials that our trust in Jesus is shown to be genuine. And why does it matter if our faith is genuine. So first of all, what we see here, there's obviously an element where faith cannot be genuine. So we want our faith to be genuine. Why does it matter if it's genuine? Because, we see here, Peter says, it is our faith that guards us for the day of salvation. If we want to make it through, if we want our salvation to be guarded, kept until that final day, we need genuine faith. Now, I'm going to do a little bit of grammatical bear poking and hope I don't have my hand bitten off, okay? But I think it's important for us to understand what Peter means when he says faith here. Because we can have all sorts of ideas what faith means, and like my faith, your faith, we have different ideas of faith. In verse 5, he says we are being guarded through faith for salvation. And in verse 7 he says, so the tested genuineness of your faith may be found, or may be seen, may be revealed. What isn't super clear to us as English readers, or maybe we should say actually, not Greek readers, maybe more accurate, is that throughout the New Testament, the word for faith and faithfulness is exactly the same word. It's exactly the same word. Faith and faithfulness is exactly the same word in Greek. And so what happens is it's up to translators to decide which one they think fits best. And in some cases, that is going to depend on the translators' kind of theological presuppositions. Because there's a little bit of nuance between faith and faithfulness. Now, I don't actually think this is a huge issue. Because I actually don't think, I think as long as we recognise that faith and faithfulness aren't really separate things. You can't have faith without being faithful. And that's kind of Peter's whole point here. Faith, by this idea of just kind of faith, internal faith, can't be shown because it is internal. It can't be proven. It can't be revealed or tested. Faith is this internal belief that certain things are true. And how is that then tested and shown? Can only be through faithfulness, right? The fullness of faith coming out. I mean, you can say, can't you? We know this. You can say, I'm a Christian and I trust Jesus. You can say that till you're blue in the face. But if you're not living as though it's true, what kind of faith is it that is internal? I mean, it's just what James says, isn't it? What good is it, my brothers, if someone says he has faith, but does not have works? Can that faith save him? Again, he's making a point in the form of a question. No. He says, for as the body apart from the spirit is dead, so also faith, apart from works, apart from faithfulness, is dead. It's our faithfulness that is tested through trials. When the proverbial stuff hits the fan, right? Where do we go? Who do we trust? That is seen and revealed in what we do. Yeah? So what do we do when our job is threatened? Or when money is tight? Do we worry and become anxious and less charitable? Because we're like, I need to hold on to all my stuff now. Yeah? Do we maybe even consider doing kind of ethically dubious things to make ends meet? Or do we turn to prayer and remain joyful and continue being generous because we know that all we have comes from God? Boys and girls, when our friends kind of abandon us or just think we're a bit weird for the things because we won't do certain things with them, do we moan at our parents? Because actually we believe that our lives actually would be better if they would just let us do those things. Or do we pray and thank God we have godly parents who want to guard us and keep us and love us? When we're sick and ill, does it cause us to doubt God's goodness? To become short-tempered and irritable? Does our illness make us actually selfish and inward-looking? Or do we see it as a calling? That we are being set aside for a special ministry, perhaps of prayer and intercession, an example of Christ's sufferings, so we can intercede for the church and proclaim Jesus in the way we live through our illness. I think that is why James says that those suffering illnesses need to be anointed with oil by the church elders, because they're actually being set apart for a special area of service. In the hardest times, when all that is false and trivial is stripped away, only our faith in Jesus can survive. We may well lose everything else, including our earthly riches, but if we understand the real worth of Jesus, then we can deal with losing everything else. Suffering can make us see the true value of things. What do we really need for life and eternity? What is truly essential? We've learned some of those things, haven't we, through Lent, as we've gone through that process as a church. If we offer our situation to Jesus, then suffering is able to refine us, showing us that trusting in Jesus is infinitely more valuable than everything else. And so Peter says, it is only because of God's mercy that you have been born again. And this new life of heaven that you have been born into, it is guarded. It is kept in heaven for you. No, it is sure. No if, buts, or maybes. God is guarding that life. He is keeping it. It is secure. And do you know what? God is guarding you too. For you, verse 5, who by God's power are being guarded, being kept. That's great news, isn't it? God's mercy saves us. He is guarding the new life in heaven, and he's guarding me. Great. Does that mean, and this is one of the questions Paul asks in Romans, does that mean we can let our life just slip into neutral and coast to the finish line? And Paul's answer in Romans is no. Because how is God guarding us? How do we, as it were, kind of tap into that power of God that is guarding us? Faithfulness is how. That is how God is guarding. That's how God's guarding power becomes a reality in our lives. That we take advantage of his life through faithfulness. You who by God's power are being guarded through faithfulness. It's God who keeps us, but he keeps us through faithfulness. Trials reveal what we really trust and what we really believe to fix our problems. When hard things happen, what do we reach for? What do we turn to for support? Is it drink, porn, binge watching, food, retail therapy? None of those things satisfy. None of those things last. None of those things bring life and health. And they're so prevalent in the world. And the world is saying, no, they do, they're great. They're not. We need to train our hearts, our minds, and our bodies to put Jesus at the center. Because he is the only one who can bring us through the trials of life. He is the only one who can bring us through the grave. So we keep our eyes fixed on him. His word and his blood are central to the way we live. I'm trying to walk us through Peter's argument here, but instead perhaps of breaking it down theologically, let's just simply look at Peter himself for a moment. Let's go back to that night with Peter around the fire. Jesus has just been arrested, and Peter has asked, hey, aren't you that guy who was with Jesus? And Peter said repeatedly, in the strongest possible words, I don't know the man. Get lost. Peter, just a few hours earlier, had been, Lord, I'll be with you to the end. Lord, you're everything. It seems like his faith was genuine. But in that moment, the genuineness of Peter's faith was tested, and it was revealed in that moment that Peter believed the scary things of the world were far more powerful and more real and more important than Jesus. In that moment, Peter believed that his actions would help him and give him life better than Jesus could give him life. And so he said, no, I don't know him. What he did showed what was going on in him. And so Peter now, his main point in his letter is summed up in chapter 4. He says, beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery trial when it comes upon you to test you. Don't be surprised as though something strange were happening to you, but rejoice as you share in Christ's sufferings. Peter looked back, and do you know what? He wished he'd been crucified with Jesus that day. I wished I had stood by him, and I wish I'd been put on a cross next to him. What have I missed out on? And as he writes his letter, he realizes that that thief on the cross had it far better than he did. Why? Because for 3 whole days, Peter was alone, and he was scared, and he was quivering, and he was doubting. Where was the thief in those 3 days? He was with Jesus. Better to be in the grave with Jesus than alive without him, Peter learns. Better to be suffering with Jesus than in luxury without him, Peter learns. Peter understands now that it is only with Jesus that life is good, that life makes sense, even when it involves suffering, because Jesus is life. The reality of human life, if we've lived on this earth for any amount of time, we've worked it out. The reality of life is one big trial, one big struggle. We have physical pain, emotional pain, relational pain. We struggle with the reality of our past, and we worry about all the possibilities of our future. And life without Jesus, life is pointless. Suffering is pointless. But with Jesus, even suffering is an opportunity to experience more of him, to share in his sufferings, and to become like him. There's a wonderful story about a couple who were touring a gold refinery. And they're getting the tour, and they come to this point where this man, he's putting molten gold in and out of the furnace, in and out of the fire. Puts it in, takes it out for a while, looks at it, puts it back in again. And they ask him, what are you doing? And he explains how gold, when it comes out of the earth, is full of impurities, bits of rock and dirt and things you just don't want in your gold, because it makes it less strong. And so he says, I put the gold into the fire to burn, to heat it up, and all the impurities come to the top, and they're burnt off. And the visitor says, oh, that's great. How do you know when all the impurities have gone? How do you know when the gold is pure and it's ready to come completely out of the fire? And the goldsmith replies, he says, well, when all the impurities have gone, the gold has this smooth, mirror-like surface. I know it's ready when I can see myself in it, when I can see my reflection. Peter says, your faith is more precious than gold that perishes even though it's tested by fire. Jesus is our refiner. He wants to remove all of our impurities, all of our sin and our shame, all of our doubts and our fears, all the things that make us brittle and threaten to break us. He wants to refine us so that all that's left in us is his image, is his life. The trials of life are God's furnace. He doesn't put us in there and walk away. He is tenderly holding us in the fire and taking us out and putting us back in. Not to break us, not to ruin us, not to hurt us, but to help us and to refine us. All of life is suffering, whether you follow Jesus or not. Following Jesus is no guarantee that life's going to be easy. All of life is suffering. The question is, are we going to let that drive us to Jesus, or we're going to let it drive us to self-destruction. If you're already suffering, and God hasn't caused it, but he does want to use it. You're already suffering. Let God make sense of it for you. Let him use it to make his image in you, to bring you to him, because he is the only one who understands your suffering. Peter knew we lived in a world that is hostile to Jesus. And at one time he thought the way to deal with that was to distance himself from Jesus. But now he knows better. Peter once let the trials of life push him away from Jesus, and he deeply regretted it. But Peter has now learned a new wisdom, the profound hidden wisdom of the Lord Jesus. The way of the cross is the way of true life, eternal life, resurrection life. The way of Jesus seems to lead to shame, sacrifice, and death, but in fact it leads to glory, honor, and life. Peter, who had previously fallen under the wisdom of the devil when he tried to turn Jesus away from the cross, tells us very clearly how to resist the devil. In this letter, Peter shares with the whole church down the ages the true grace of the living God. Beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery trial when it comes upon you, but rejoice as you share in Christ's sufferings. In the end, Peter did rejoice as he himself was crucified for following Jesus. That's how the disciple Peter ended his life. He was killed for being a Christian, and he got the cross in the end. He was crucified. That thing that seemed so repulsive to him, that night around the fire, became a joy for him. He could have renounced Christ and avoided the cross again, but he didn't. Peter denied Jesus 3 times to avoid the cross, and Peter learned that actually took him away from Jesus. There's a wonderful bit we don't have time to go into this morning, but where Jesus takes Peter and he forgives him and he restores him 3 times. And Peter then ended his life embracing the cross. The cross that he realized was actually going to take him to be with Jesus. The cross that was actually going to take him to be back with his friend. The way of the Christian is suffering now and glory later. But even in the suffering there is great joy and hope to be found, because it is here, in the furnace, in the fire, that Jesus is most clearly seen. And it is here that we share in Jesus' life. The suffering isn't the end, it isn't the point of being a Christian, but it is the way. We are wanted, we are washed clean, and so we are faithful. All glory be to Jesus. Amen.